The morning the black SUVs rolled into the cracked parking lot of the small Ohio diner, everyone inside froze. 4 men in dark suits stepped out first, scanning the street like they were guarding a president. Then 2 sharply dressed lawyers followed, holding leather briefcases that looked more expensive than the entire building. And they weren't there for the mayor. They weren't there for a celebrity. They were there for the quiet, tired woman who washed dishes in the back. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that even the smallest good deed can change a life, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that goodness still exists. Every morning at exactly 6:10 a.m., Nathan Cole would pull his aging blue pickup into that same diner parking lot in Dayton, Ohio. He was a single father, 36 years old, with permanent shadows under his eyes and hands rough from construction work. Since his wife passed away from an unexpected aneurysm 3 years earlier, life had become a daily uphill climb. He woke before sunrise, made breakfast for his 7-year-old son Caleb, packed his lunch, dropped him off at school, and then stopped at Rosie's Diner for coffee before heading to the job site. That was where he first noticed her. Her name was Margaret Hayes. She looked older than she probably was, her brown hair streaked with gray, pulled back into a loose bun. She wore the same faded cardigan almost every day, even in the summer. Margaret didn't sit at the tables. She stayed near the counter, quietly asking customers if they had any spare change for breakfast. Most people avoided eye contact. Some pretended not to hear her. A few muttered something under their breath. The first time Nathan saw her, he hesitated. He barely had enough money to keep the lights on in his small rented house. His truck needed new brakes. Caleb's sneakers were wearing thin at the soles. But there was something about Margaret's eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't demanding. They were tired. Deeply, painfully tired. That morning, instead of buying himself coffee, Nathan bought 2 breakfasts. He handed one to her without saying much and sat down quietly across the room. Margaret tried to refuse at first, but hunger overruled pride. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone afraid the food might disappear. The next morning he did it again. Soon it became routine. Every weekday Nathan would buy her breakfast. Sometimes pancakes, sometimes just eggs and toast. On colder mornings he added a cup of hot tea. He never asked her for anything. He never tried to pry into her story. Over time, small conversations formed between them. He learned that she had once owned a small bookstore in Chicago with her husband, Thomas. After he died, debts piled up. A business partner betrayed her. Lawsuits followed. The store was lost. The apartment was taken. Pride kept her from asking distant relatives for help. Margaret had drifted from state to state before ending up in Ohio, taking temporary jobs when she could. Recently, even that had become difficult. The diner owner, a gruff but soft-hearted man named Walter Jenkins, eventually offered her a few hours washing dishes in exchange for meals. Nathan never judged her. In some strange way, their grief connected them. He spoke about Caleb often, about how hard it was to explain to a child why Mommy wasn't coming back. Margaret listened carefully, sometimes with tears in her eyes. She would tell him he was doing better than he realized. At home, money grew tighter. One evening, Caleb asked why they didn't go out for pizza anymore. Nathan smiled and told him they were saving for something special. The truth was, those breakfasts for Margaret added up. It wasn't a fortune, but for someone living paycheck to paycheck, it mattered. One night, after putting Caleb to bed, Nathan sat alone at the kitchen table staring at unpaid bills. For the first time, he considered stopping. Just for a while, he told himself. Margaret would understand. He had responsibilities. But the next morning, when he saw her standing in the cold wind outside the diner, arms wrapped around herself, he didn't have the heart. He bought the breakfast. Winter hit hard that year. Snow piled high along the streets. Margaret's cardigan wasn't enough anymore. Without making a big show of it, Nathan brought one of his late wife's old coats. It was simple, navy blue, warm. Margaret held it like it was something fragile and sacred. Weeks passed. Then came the morning that changed everything. Nathan arrived as usual, but something felt different. 2 black SUVs were parked in front of the diner. He assumed some politician must be visiting. Inside, customers whispered. Walter stood near the register looking confused. Margaret was nowhere in sight. Then the doors opened, and 4 large bodyguards entered first. They positioned themselves around the room with quiet authority. Behind them walked 2 sharply dressed attorneys, a man and a woman, both carrying leather briefcases. The room fell silent. Margaret stepped in behind them, but she looked different. Her hair was neatly styled. She wore a tailored gray coat and low heels. She looked dignified, composed, almost unrecognizable. Nathan felt his stomach drop. Had he misunderstood everything? Had she been pretending? Was this some elaborate scam? The female lawyer cleared her throat and asked for Nathan Cole. His heart pounded as every eye turned toward him. Slowly, he stood. Margaret walked toward him, her expression soft but serious. The lawyer began explaining in calm, measured tones that Margaret Hayes was the sole surviving heir to a substantial estate recently uncovered after years of legal battles in Chicago. Evidence had surfaced proving that the business partner who had taken her bookstore had committed fraud. A federal investigation led to frozen assets being released. The estate was valued in the millions. Nathan felt dizzy. Margaret looked at him, eyes shimmering. She explained that during the legal process, her attorneys had located her through employment records in Dayton. They had insisted on immediate security due to threats connected to the reopened fraud case. The bodyguards were for protection. Then Margaret said something that stunned him more than the money. She told the lawyers to open the second briefcase. Inside were documents. Over the past several months, she had quietly observed Nathan. His consistency, his humility, the way he never once asked for anything in return, the way he spoke about Caleb with devotion. She said that in her darkest season, when she felt invisible and discarded, he treated her like a human being, like she mattered. And now that her life had been restored, she intended to restore his. The documents included a fully paid college fund for Caleb, a down payment on a modest house in a safe neighborhood in Dayton, and a small investment account to ease Nathan's financial burden. Nathan's first instinct was to refuse. Pride flared in his chest. He hadn't helped her for reward. But Margaret gently reminded him that accepting kindness is sometimes just as important as giving it. She told him that generosity should flow both ways. Tears welled in his eyes as he thought about Caleb, about the nights worrying how he would ever afford college, about the stress that kept him awake. Slowly, with trembling hands, he signed the papers. Word spread quickly through the diner. Walter wiped his eyes behind the counter. Regular customers clapped softly. For the first time in years, Nathan felt something lift from his shoulders. Margaret didn't disappear after that. She kept the coat he had given her. She visited Caleb occasionally, bringing books and telling him stories about running a bookstore. She invested in reopening a small independent shop in Dayton, naming it Second Chapter Books. Nathan helped renovate the space on weekends. Life didn't become perfect overnight. Nathan still worked hard. He still missed his wife every day. But the crushing weight of survival eased. And more importantly, Caleb grew up watching a living example of compassion returning in ways no one could predict. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment right now to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe for more stories that restore faith in humanity. And before we reach the end, please comment the word hope if you believe one small act can change a lifetime. Years later, when Caleb stood on a stage to receive his college scholarship award, Margaret sat proudly in the front row. Nathan realized something profound. He had thought he was simply buying breakfast. In reality, he had been investing in something far greater. Because sometimes the person you think you're saving is the very person who will save you. And in a small diner in Ohio, a single dad learned that kindness never goes unnoticed. It waits, it grows quietly, and when the time is right, it returns with bodyguards, lawyers, and a future you never dared to imagine.